You know that feeling when you walk into a really old library?
Mm.
Not one of the modern ones, but one of those places with the dark wood, the green
The
lamps.
ones that smell like old paper and vanilla.
Exactly that smell.
Right.
And you pull a book off the shelf, something leather bound with gold lettering on the spine.
You can feel the weight of it in your hands, the gravitas.
Yeah, the gravitas. And you think, this is it. This is the real deal. The wisdom of the ages is right here.
You feel smarter just holding it. It's like you can absorb the knowledge through osmosis.
It never works that way, though, does it? Because then you open it, you read the first sentence,
Okay.
you read the second.
And by the time you're at the bottom of page 1,
You have absolutely no idea what is going on. I mean, the words are English, the sentences seem to be constructed correctly, but the meaning just, it slides right off your brain.
you have just perfectly described the universal experience of trying to read Immanuel Kant for the first time.
We are going there today. We are taking a run at the undisputed heavyweight champion of unreadable but essential masterpieces.
Immanuel Kant's critique of aesthetic judgment.
The book that supposedly defined how the entire Western world has thought about art and beauty and nature for, the last 200 plus years?
And maybe more famously, the book that has been giving philosophy students crippling migraines for just as long. It is just notoriously dense.
And this is the whole reason we're doing this deep dive, we are not just going to try and brute force our way through Kant's original text.
That would be a very, very painful episode
Yeah.
for us and for you.
It would. No, we have a guide. We have a secret weapon.
Right.
We're looking at this monster of a book through a very specific, and I have to say, a very surprising lens.
We're looking at the 1911 translation, but more importantly, the preface written by a scholar named James Creed Meredith.
And Meredith is not just some translator. He's more like a detective. He comes to the text with this theory that, honestly, it completely changes the game. He argues the reason we all struggle with Kant, the reason critics have been fighting over this book for a century, is because we are all reading it wrong.
We're reading it like a textbook.
And Meredith says,
It's not a textbook, it's a drama,
a play.
a full-on theater production.
That's the hook that got me. I mean, the idea that Immanuel Kant, the guy whose daily routine was so rigid, his neighbors could literally set their watches by his afternoon walk.
The clockwork philosopher of Königsberg.
That guy was secretly writing a suspense thriller with heroes, villains, and massive plot twists. It just sounds wrong.
It does sound absurd on the surface, doesn't it? But as we start to unpack what Meredith is arguing, you'll see it actually starts to make a weird kind of sense. It solves the riddles.
So that's our mission for today. We're going to use Meredith as our guide to unpack this dramatic theory. We'll find out why the experts have always been so confused. We're going to watch this play of the human mind unfold and then see how Meredith uses this whole idea to defend Kant against 100 years of criticism.
We're taking the text off the page and putting it on the stage.
Before we dive into the philosophy, though, I just want to set the scene, the physical object itself. We're talking about the Clarendon Press edition, Oxford, 1911.
Right.
And right there on the title page, before Meredith even writes a single word of his own analysis, he puts a quote, a little snippet of a poem.
It's from Wordsworth.
It is. It goes, "Yeah, what were mighty nature's self? Her features, could they win us, unhelped by the poetic voice that hourly speaks within us?"
That is such a perfect choice. I mean, it's not just some fancy decoration to look intellectual. That quote, it really frames the entire investigation Meredith is about to launch into.
How so? Because, normally I'd expect a dry definition. Aesthetics is the study of X. But he starts with poetry.
Well, look at the question Wordsworth is asking. What were mighty nature's self, unhelped by the poetic voice? He's asking, is a mountain beautiful on its own? Is a sunset still beautiful if there's no one there to see it?
Or does it need us? Does it need that poetic voice inside our own minds to, project beauty onto it?
That's the question, isn't it? Is beauty a property of the object, like its mass or its chemical composition? Or is it a property of the observer? Is it out there in the world, or is it in here, in our heads?
And that's exactly what Kant is wrestling with in the critique.
He's trying to build a bridge. On one side of this huge chasm, you have the world of facts, of science atoms, gravity, the bark on a tree. That's the world of what is.
Okay.
On the other side, you have the world of freedom, of morality,
Yeah.
of feeling, the world of what ought to be. And Kant is trying to figure out how we get from one side to the other. When I say that mountain is majestic, I'm mixing a physical fact, the mountain, with a personal feeling of awe. How is that even possible?
And the really weird part is that I expect you to agree with me. That's what always gets me.
Yes.
If I say, I love strawberry ice cream, you say, I hate it, I don't care, it's just a preference. But if I say, this piece by Mozart is a sublime masterpiece, and you say, it's just a bunch of noise,
You feel like they're wrong.
I feel like you're objectively wrong, like you're missing something fundamental about the universe.
Exactly. We treat judgments of beauty as if they're facts, even though we know deep down they're just feelings. That paradox is the engine that drives the entire book.
But getting to Kant's answer for why we do that is famously a slog. So Meredith, in his preface, he tackles his problem head on. He calls it the great confusion.
He points out this really strange fact about intellectual history. He says something like, "It seems a strange fact that the works which have exerted the greatest and most permanent influence are those of which it is most difficult to give a final and conclusive interpretation."
That is paradox number one right there. You'd think the most influential books would be the clearest ones, the ones where everyone reads it and says, ah, yes, of course, I get it.
But it's the complete opposite. Think about it. We're still arguing about Plato. We are definitely still arguing about the Bible or the Constitution. And we are absolutely 100% still arguing about Kant.
So the obscurity is actually a feature, not a bug.
Well, Meredith floats 3 possible theories for why this happens. 3 reasons why the great books are so hard to pin down. And I think these apply to way more than just philosophy.
Okay, so let's break them down. What's theory number one?
Theory 1 is what he calls the riddle theory.
The riddle theory.
This is the most cynical view. It basically asks, are these great philosophers just amusing themselves by creating incredibly complex riddles? Is the obscurity deliberate, like a game?
Like they're trying to gatekeep the knowledge.
Or maybe they're trying to protect the magic. Meredith asks this great question. Is it not so much misinterpretation as explanation that great philosophers have to fear? The idea is that the solution to the big philosophical problem might be so simple or so, boring that if they just said it plainly, no one would care. The interest would just die.
Oh, that's like a magic trick. If the magician shows you the false bottom in the box, you're not amazed anymore. You're just disappointed.
Precisely. The smoke and mirrors are what create the wonder. If Kant just came out and said, beauty is a certain type of pleasurable feeling that we think everyone should share, people might just go, okay, cool, and move on.
Yeah.
The complexity forces you to engage with it.
I feel like I see this in the tech world sometimes. Some of those crypto white papers are so dense you just assume there has to be genius in there somewhere.
Complexity is a form of camouflage. It's a real thing. But Meredith doesn't really think that's what Kant is up to. He has too much respect for him. So that brings him to theory number 2.
Which is the higher category theory.
Now this one is less cynical, but it's much more intimidating for us regular folks. It suggests that these great thinkers are asking questions that depend on higher categories than those of our common everyday understanding.
In other words, it's not the writer, it's you. Your brain is just too small.
Pretty much. You're trying to run a 64-bit program on an 8-bit processor. The concepts they're dealing with, things like infinity, or the sublime, or the noumenal world, you literally cannot compress them into everyday language without breaking them.
That's kind of depressing. It feels like being told you're just not tall enough to ride the roller coaster of truth.
It is. And, there's probably some truth to it. Kant is operating at the very limits of human thought. But Meredith ultimately rejects this as the main reason, too. He thinks it's something else. Which brings him to his third theory, the one he thinks is the winner.
The many-sided theory.
Yes. Meredith argues that the works that last, the ones that have the most influence, are the ones that are most comprehensive and many-sided.
The old story about the blind man and the elephant.
That is the perfect metaphor for it. One critic grabs the elephant's trunk and shouts, Kant is a snake. Another grabs the leg and says, no, Kant is a tree. A third one feels the tusk and is convinced, you're both wrong, Kant is a spear.
And Meredith is saying that Kant's book isn't the part, it's the whole elephant.
It's just so massive. It's so ambitious. Kant is trying to build a single system that connects logic, feeling, nature, art, science, and morality. It's almost inevitable that different readers will grab onto different pieces and claim that their piece is the whole thing.
And because they only see their one little part, they think all the other parts must be mistakes.
Exactly. Meredith actually lists the main accusations that critics have thrown at Kant over the years, and they are brutal.
What are they?
Well, they claim he falls into flagrant inconsistency. They say he wavers on the most important questions. They say he starts the book with one definition of beauty and ends with a completely different one.
So basically, he's a flip-flopper. He couldn't make up his mind, so he just threw everything at the wall.
They even accuse him of abandoning his own core philosophy, his famous critical idealism, just to make his theory of aesthetics work. They're basically saying he cheated to get the answer he wanted.
And Meredith's goal with this whole preface is to clear Kant's name.
He wants to mount a defense. But, and this is the absolute key, this is the pivot point of our entire deep dive today, he doesn't defend Kant by saying, no, you just misread that sentence, or Kant is perfect and never made a mistake.
He does it by saying,
He does it by saying, you are fundamentally misunderstanding the genre of the book you are reading.
you're showing up to a movie and complaining that it isn't a slideshow.
You're reading a drama and complaining that the characters aren't telling you the final truth in Act 1.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. This brings us to the second big idea, Kant's method. Meredith claims that if you just understand how Kant writes, all those so-called inconsistencies just melt away, and he describes it with this really cool concept he calls the momentum of truth.
I love this description. It's so completely contrary to how we're all taught to write now. Today, it's all about BLUF. Bottom line up front.
Totally. Give me the executive summary, the abstract, the tweet. Just tell me the answer so I can move on.
Meredith says most writers do that. They try to say the last word before they have said the first. They're impatient, they're so afraid you'll misunderstand them, that they just dump the entire bucket of truth on your head in the first paragraph.
But Kant doesn't do that.
Kant does the exact opposite. Meredith says he makes sure of saying the first word first.
Okay, that sounds a little circular. What does that mean in practice?
It means he holds back. He is incredibly, almost unnervingly disciplined. On any given page, he only reveals as much of the truth as is strictly necessary for the argument on that specific page. He refuses to jump ahead.
So let's say he's writing about something simple, like the agreeable things we just like, the taste of a good wine or the feeling of a warm bath. He won't mention moral duty on that page,
Not at all,
even if he knows that 200 pages later he's going to connect them.
especially then. Because at that early stage of the investigation, moral duty doesn't exist yet in the argument. He hasn't built the foundation for it. Meredith calls it a gradual unfolding. He says his advance is a steady progress. In each step forward, he seems borne along with the momentum of his previous progress.
It's like a snowball rolling down a hill.
That's a perfect image for it. It starts out as just a tiny little flake of logic, this is a flower, but it starts to roll. And as it rolls, it picks up more snow, it gathers weight, it picks up speed. Meredith says this momentum is never checked, and the work is finally let go with all its accumulated force.
So by the time you actually get to the conclusion at the end of the book, it doesn't just feel like a statement. It hits you with the full weight of the entire book behind it.
Yes, because the argument is organic. It's been growing. It hasn't just been stated. And this is why Meredith says Kant's work feels like it has an independent life. It feels like it's growing and developing right in front of you as you read.
But there's a big downside to that method, right? If you're a student and you just dip into page 50 to read for a class.
You're completely lost. You're missing all the momentum that got you to that point. You're seeing a single frame from a moving picture and thinking that frame is the whole movie.
And you'll probably think that frame contradicts the frame from page 100.
Of course. Meredith even admits this style can seem strange. He says it savors of affectation. It looks like Kant is just being dramatic for the sake of it. But Meredith argues it's a structural necessity. You cannot understand the synthesis at the end until you have lived through the thesis and the antithesis that come before.
So you have to earn the ending.
You have to earn the ending.
All right, so that's the gradual unfolding, the momentum of truth. But Meredith takes this one giant leap further. He drops his biggest bombshell. He says this isn't just about the momentum of an argument, it's about characters on a stage.
This is the core of it, Section 3, Philosophy as Theater. Meredith writes, and this is a direct quote from his preface, "He is, of all philosophers, with the possible exception of Plato, the most dramatic."
I still can't quite get my head around that. Kant, dramatic. This is the man famous for writing sentences that are a full page long and feel like complex algebra equations.
I know. But forget the sentences for a second and look at the structure. Meredith says the critiques are plays. The major books within them are the acts. The numbered sections are the scenes.
Okay, so if it's a play, who are the actors? Who's on the stage?
The characters are the faculties of the mind.
Right, okay, we need to define our terms here for a second.
Yeah.
When we say faculties, what exactly are we talking about?
We're talking about the different sort of departments of your brain.
Yeah.
To simplify it, but to give them their distinct personalities, you've got Imagination.
That's the creative one, the artist, the one that sees faces in the clouds or comes up with new ideas.
Exactly. Imagination is free, it's wild, it's generative. Then you've got understanding.
Understanding is the bureaucrat, the librarian.
Perfect. Understanding has the rule book. It wants to put everything in a neat little box with a label on it. That is a cloud. It is composed of water vapor. It is classified as a cumulus. Understanding needs concepts and definitions to function.
And then there's the third one, reason.
Reason is the CEO, the big picture thinker. Reason wants everything to fit into a grand, unified purpose. Reason is always asking why, while understanding is asking what, and imagination is asking what if.
So in a normal, boring philosophy book, the author would just tell you how these three are supposed to work together. You know, imagination provides the raw data, which understanding then categorizes for reason's grand purposes. End of story.
But Meredith says Kant doesn't do that at all. Kant introduces them upon the stage as if they were so many dramatis personae. He literally gives them lines. He lets them argue. He lets them fight.
Wait, they fight?
Constantly. That's the whole drama of the critique. Imagination presents something beautiful and overwhelming, like a massive storm at sea. Understanding tries to slap a label on it and completely fails. It stammers, I don't have a concept for this. So there's tension. There's conflict. Meredith says they betray their character by the part they play on stage.
And Kant, as the playwright, deliberately creates these inextricable situations. He writes plot holes on purpose.
He writes logical knots that seem impossible to untie. He backs his characters into a corner where it looks like there's no possible solution. And then he just lets the tension hang there. He withholds the solution to keep the reader in suspense.
Okay, now all those inconsistencies the critics complain about make so much more sense. If a character in Act 1 says one thing and a different character in Act 2 says the complete opposite,
That's not the author being confused.
that's the characters having a debate.
Exactly. It's like watching Hamlet. If you just listened to Polonius saying, neither a borrower nor lender be, and then wrote a review saying, Shakespeare clearly believes we should never lend money, you'd be completely missing the point. That's just Polonius's opinion. Shakespeare is the entire play. Kant is the entire critique.
This is too good to leave in the abstract. We have to see this in action. Meredith gives a specific example, a play within the book, from section 40 of Kant's work. I want to walk through this, scene by scene, just like he does.
This is the best way to get it. It really brings the whole theory down to earth.
Okay, so the plot. The central conflict of this little mini play is about what Kant calls the reference to duty, or why we demand social agreement about beauty.
We touched on this. It's the big question. Why do we feel there's a duty for others to agree with our taste? Why isn't it just a private feeling?
Why do I feel like you should find the Grand Canyon beautiful? Where does that should come from?
Right. What's the basis for that demand?
All right, so curtain up. Act 1, Scene 1. The first character walks onto the stage. Meredith calls him empirical interest.
Now, you have to picture this guy. Empirical interest is a very distinct type. He's a pragmatist, maybe an evolutionary psychologist. He's very social, very concerned with how we all get along.
So empirical interest strolls out, looks at the problem. Why do we agree on beauty? And he says, I've got this. This is easy.
He says the answer is simple. We agree on beauty because we're social animals. Evolution has hardwired us to do so. Agreeing on what looks good helps us bond. It helps us form tribes. Art is just a fancy mechanism for social cohesion.
Basically, I'll tell you I like your cave painting, so you'll like me and help me hunt the mammoth tomorrow.
It's a very modern-sounding argument, isn't it?
Yep.
It's plausible. It explains the utility of having shared taste.
So, is that it? Case closed. Did he win the argument?
Nope. Kant, the director, steps in and basically shoves him off the stage. Meredith says he is curtly dismissed.
But why? It seemed like a pretty good answer.
Because it's only empirical. It describes what people do, but it doesn't explain the normative part. It explains why we might happen to agree, but not why we feel we ought to agree. It makes our judgment of beauty conditional. If you want to have friends, you should like this art. Kant wants to know why beauty feels like a universal law, even if you're the last person on Earth.
So empirical interest is out. He was too shallow for this play.
He's gone. So, Scene 2. A new character enters. Meredith calls this one intellectual interest.
Okay, what's this guy's deal? Who would you cast in this role?
Oh, he's the complete opposite of the first guy. He's the solitary genius, the hermit philosopher living on a mountaintop. Meredith says he has a high character beyond question, but there's a problem. He's a bit of a
And
snob.
to snob how?
Meredith's phrasing is great. He says this character begins to confide in us on the subject of hints he has heard, of the objective reality of the ideas of reason.
So he's like a conspiracy theorist, but for philosophy. Just, hey, come here. I know the real secret. The reason beauty is so special is because it's a secret message from the cosmos.
That's it exactly. He believes that beautiful things are symbols of morality. When we see a beautiful flower, we're really seeing a hint that nature itself is good, that the universe is fundamentally aligned with our moral purposes. It's a very spiritual, very high-minded view.
That sounds a lot more like the Kant I thought I knew.
It is. It's a much deeper argument.
Yeah.
But this character has a tragic flaw. He makes a fatal error. He claims he can solve the whole problem, but then he reveals his betrayal. He says, by the way, I am only interested in the beauty of nature.
Wait, what about art? What about paintings and statues and symphonies?
Intellectual interest basically spits on them. He ignores art completely. In fact, Meredith notes that once art isn't in the room, bad things are once said about the artist behind his back.
He's gossiping about the painters.
He is. He calls art mere virtuosity, just people showing off their technical skill. He argues that nature is the only source of pure beauty, because nature isn't trying to trick you. A flower is innocent. A painting is a beautiful lie, created by a fallible human.
So this character, intellectual interest, he walks off stage thinking he's won. He thinks, I've solved it. Beauty is a symbol of morality, but only natural beauty. Museums are a waste of everyone's time.
And if you're the reader, you are left completely bewildered. You're thinking, wait, so Kant hates art. A sunset is morally superior to the Mona Lisa. If you stopped reading right there, which many critics apparently did, you would walk away with a completely warped view of Kant's project.
You would think he's some kind of Puritan who only likes gardening.
Precisely. But this is just scene 2. In a movie, this is the all is lost moment. The hero seems defeated.
Scene 3, the plot twist.
The curtain rises again, and suddenly, standing right there at center stage, is the character of Art.
And I love how Meredith describes Art's entrance. He says Art appears calm and self-confident.
Art doesn't need to shout, it just is. And here comes the great revelation, the synthesis. We discover that true beauty is actually the expression of what Kant calls aesthetic ideas.
And what does that mean for that big fight between nature and art that intellectual interest set up?
It means it was a false dichotomy. It was a red herring. It turns out nature and art are two sides of the very same coin. Nature is beautiful when it looks like art, when it seems to have purpose and design.
And art is beautiful when it looks like nature.
When it feels free, spontaneous, and unforced. Not like it's just following a set of rules.
They're mirroring each other.
They're both expressions of the same underlying creative power in the human mind. So that intellectual interest character, the nature mystic, he was just plain wrong to separate them.
He was a distracting subplot. Kant let him have his say just to demonstrate how limited and incomplete that perspective really is.
You got it. Which brings us to Act 4, the denouement, the final resolution of the play.
So what is the final answer? Why do we have this reference to duty? Why do we demand that other people agree with us about beauty?
The final reveal is that taste, our ability to judge beauty, is the crucial transition point from philosophy to anthropology.
Whoa, anthropology, where'd that come from? That's a total curveball.
It is, but think about what it means. It means that art and our shared sense of taste are what form the bond of union for human brotherhood.
Okay, you have to break that down.
The answer isn't about biological survival, which was the theory from empirical interest. And it isn't about some solitary, mystical contemplation of God in a flower, which was the theory from intellectual interest. It's about the fundamental fact that we are social beings who must be able to share our deepest feelings in order to be fully human.
Meredith has this really beautiful line about bridging the gap between the cultured and less cultured.
He does. He says art is destined to be a bond of union between the more and less cultured sections of the community.
That's a profoundly democratic idea.
It really is. The ultimate moral of this whole play is that art is not a luxury for the wealthy. It's not just, as Meredith says, a collection of symbols of luxury. It is the necessary bridge that connects all human minds. That reference to duty, that nagging feeling that you must agree with me, is actually the deep-seated human drive for unity and communion.
It's the drive to be able to say, I see this beautiful thing and I need you to see it too, so that I know we're not alone in the universe, so I know we share a world.
Precisely. It's about what Kant calls the sensus communis, the common sense. Not common sense in the way we use it, like don't touch a hot stove, but a communal sense, a shared capacity for feeling that makes society possible.
And that's a conclusion you could never, ever reach if you only listened to the empirical character or the intellectual character. You had to watch the whole play. You had to see them both fail to see the synthesis emerge at the end.
And Meredith's whole point is that the critics who call Kant inconsistent are just the people who walked out of the theater during Act Two.
They heard the intellectual interest character bad-mouthing art, and they immediately ran out to write a review titled, Kant Hates Art.
They missed the ending. They didn't have the patience to see how the momentum of the argument resolved itself.
This dramatic method really does seem to solve the riddle. It changes the book from a broken instruction manual into a complex and unfolding narrative. But Meredith doesn't just stop at literary analysis. He also does some forensic investigation of the text itself.
Yes, this brings us to what you call the afterthought investigation.
This is where Meredith puts on his Sherlock Holmes hat and pulls out a magnifying glass.
He does. He brings in the work of another scholar, a Dr. Otto Schlapp. Now, the standard view of how the Critique of Judgment was written is pretty simple. Kant sat down at his desk, wrote page 1, then page 2, and so on, until he got to the end.
You know, the logical way, the way books are supposed to be written.
But Meredith and Schlapp argue that the physical composition of the book was actually much, much messier. They put forward this conjecture, as Meredith calls it, that the most famous part of the entire book, The Analytic of the Beautiful, was actually an afterthought.
Wait, hold on. The Analytic of the Beautiful. That's the part everyone knows. That's the section with the famous 4 moments of taste. Every first-year philosophy student has to memorize them.
Quality, quantity, relation, and modality. The idea is that beauty is disinterested satisfaction, that it's universal without a concept, all of that. It's the absolute bedrock of Kantian aesthetics.
And Meredith is suggesting he wrote it last.
Or at least very late in the process. Meredith's theory is that Kant probably inserted that entire section after he'd already written as far as section 59.
That's like writing the chorus to Bohemian Rhapsody after you've already recorded the big gong at the end and then trying to shove it into the middle.
It's a radical idea,
Yeah.
but the evidence is pretty compelling. Meredith points out that if you read sections 30 through 38, they seem to be full of what he calls mere repetitions.
I've definitely noticed that reading it. You get this weird feeling of deja vu. You think, didn't he just say this exact same thing 50 pages ago, but with slightly different words?
Right. And a standard critic would just chalk that up to sloppy editing. Oh, Kant was getting old. He's repeating himself. But Meredith says, no, look at the architecture. He suggests Kant probably wrote a first draft where he solved the problem in a different way. Then later, he had this massive breakthrough. He came up with the elegant 4 moments framework, and he realized it was so much better. It was the key to the whole thing. So he had to go back and perform surgery on his own manuscript to fit it in at the beginning.
So the repetitions aren't a sign of sloppiness. They're the scars from the surgery.
Exactly. It was a late major renovation to the building's foundation. He had to jam this brilliant new analytic into the existing structure, and some of the seams still show.
Why does this matter for us, though? I mean, why should we care about the nerdy editing process of a philosopher who's been dead for 2 centuries?
It matters because it completely changes how you read the text. If you know that the analytic was a late insertion, you stop trying to force every single sentence in the middle of the book to align perfectly with it. You realize you're looking at a layered document, a palimpsest, showing the evolution of Kant's own thought.
It makes Kant seem more human, too. He wasn't just downloading fully formed truth from the heavens. He was wrestling with these ideas. He rewrote things. He patched his own work.
And Meredith is really keen to defend that messiness. He thinks the critics are just being too rigid, too demanding of perfection. And this brings us to the final section of his preface, where he gets a little feisty.
Section 6, Defending the British Tradition.
Right. You have to remember, Meredith is an Irishman, writing in Dublin, publishing through Oxford, and he clearly has a bone to pick with the philosophical establishment of his day, specifically the Kantians, who look down their noses at British philosophy.
This is the old German school versus the British school rivalry.
That's it. The German idealists, like Kant and Hegel, were the philosophical heavyweights of the 19th century. They were obsessed with transcendental logic.
Which, in simple terms, means...
It means looking at the deep universal structures of the mind itself. They weren't asking, why do I see a tree? They were asking, how is the experience of seeing anything at all even possible?
Okay. Very abstract, big picture stuff. And what about the British school?
The British were mostly empiricists and associationists, thinkers like Edmund Burke, David Hume, and a guy Meredith really wants to defend named Archibald Alison. They were much more interested in psychology. They asked practical, grounded questions. Why do I find this particular tree beautiful? Well, maybe because it reminds me of the tree in my childhood garden.
And the German Kantians basically said, that's a silly, trivial question. That's just psychology. We're doing real philosophy over here.
They did. Meredith says the Kantians of his time treated the British philosophers as a joke. He brings up a history book from his era that completely dismisses Archibald Allison in a footnote.
And Meredith steps in to defend his guy, Allison.
He does. He says he has no sympathy whatever with that condescending tone. He argues that you absolutely need the British perspective to have a complete picture.
He draws a really useful distinction between what the two schools were trying to do.
It's a fantastic clarification. He says, look, it is one thing to ask why any particular object is considered beautiful. It is another thing to inquire what is the significance for the mind of the predicate beautiful.
Okay, can you break that down for us?
Sure. The British school was asking, what are the ingredients in this specific cake that make it taste good? The sugar, the vanilla, the flour. That is a question of fact. Kant and the German school were asking a totally different question. They were asking, what does the very concept of goodness in a cake even mean? That is a question of logic.
And Meredith's point is, stop making fun of the British guys for analyzing the ingredients. That's a valid and necessary job.
Exactly. You need both. You need to understand the psychology of why we are drawn to certain things, the British project. And entity, you need to understand the deep logical structure of the judgment itself, the German project.
So the big lesson from Meredith here at the end is about intellectual humility, open-mindedness.
A true student of aesthetics must impartially hear all sides. That's his motto. He's arguing that if you only have the German logic, your philosophy is abstract and empty. But if you only have the British psychology, your analysis is blind and can't explain the big picture.
Which brings us right back around to his many-sided theory. The truth isn't in one part of the elephant. The truth is the whole elephant.
And Meredith is modeling the very method he praises in Kant. In his preface, he's synthesizing these different schools of thought, the German and the British, the dramatic analysis and the historical forensics, to get to a richer, more complete truth.
So, after all that, what does this all mean for us? We've gone from the sheer difficulty of reading Kant, to this wild dramatic method, to the detective work on the manuscript, and finally to this clash of philosophical traditions.
It is a lot to cover. But I think there's one single powerful takeaway from all of it.
Lay it on us.
I think the biggest lesson from Meredith's reading of Kant is a truth, especially when you're talking about deep, complex human experiences like beauty, is not a bullet point.
Yeah.
It is not a definition you could just memorize and put on a flashcard.
It's not a tweet.
Definitely not a tweet. It's a narrative. It's a drama. Meredith teaches us that to really understand something as complicated as why art matters, we have to be patient enough to watch the whole play unfold. We have to be willing to listen to the empirical interest inside us that just wants to survive and fit in, and also listen to the intellectual interest inside us that wants to find some higher meaning and let them have their say on stage.
And we shouldn't be afraid of the conflict and the contradictions between them.
No, the conflict is essential. The inconsistencies are part of the process of growth. We have to wait for the synthesis that can only happen at the end.
And I have to say, I love that final idea of the brotherhood of art. The fact that the resolution isn't some lonely, isolated moment of wisdom on a mountaintop. It's about connection.
It absolutely is. It reclaims art from being just a frivolous hobby or, a tax write-off for billionaires. It positions art as the fundamental way we recognize our shared humanity in each other. When I see what you find beautiful, and I can feel it too, I see a reflection of my own mind in yours. I see you. That's the real reference to duty. It's our duty to seek out and recognize our shared world.
It makes me think of that Wordsworth quote from the very beginning again. Unhelped by the poetic voice that hourly speaks within us.
We are the ones who provide that voice. The world provides the raw material, but we provide the meaning. We are the poets of our own reality.
I want to leave our listeners with one final thought today. We've spent this whole time talking about Kant as a playwright, directing these characters' reason, imagination, understanding on the stage of the mind.
A kind of mental theater.
Exactly. So the question for you to think about is, in your own life, right now, who's directing the play? Is it the empirical interest, that part of you that's just focused on being popular, getting ahead at work, and surviving the day?
Or is it the intellectual interest, the snob who needs to be right all the time, who looks down on things that are popular, and whose main goal is to feel superior?
Or Are you letting the full drama play out? Are you being patient enough to wait for that third act, the one where art can actually create a bond of union between you and the rest of the world?
If you cut the play short, you miss the whole meaning.
Don't walk out of the theater during Act Two.
Well said.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. This was a heavy one, but I think a really beautiful one.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive. Stay curious.